Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a redo of the previous lesson. The range we're going to be covering is the first 19 verses of the first chapter of Proverbs. I did one earlier. I did not do the chapter justice. So what I'm doing is doing it back, hopefully giving a more worthy and befitting testimony of, or exegesis rather, of the passage I'll be covering. Now, the book of Proverbs, the one thing I want to recommend to any teachers out there is to recommend to baby believers and new students to really get in the practice of reading one of these a day. Why one? Because there's 31 chapters. Most months have at least some of them have that many days in them. They can always take the 31st off, but the important thing is to instill the repetition, because we can't have baby believers turning at random to a passage and expecting to get something out of it. We want to have them oriented towards a concrete direction, and this will give them the repetition. And what they do is, if they stick with it, they'll notice new things with each passing month, and will build on their repertoire. So the other reason is that Proverbs is more practical and philosophical than theological. There are theological assumptions in it, but there's not a whole lot of theological jargon or even doctrine in them. These are day-to-day guidelines for living that even non-believers could benefit from. Of course, the goal in reading this and in teaching this is to get people to believe and what power they have when they believe. But a word of caution, we don't want to interpret any of these statements as promises. These are principles. So not, it connects success to and prosperity to righteousness, but that's not a guarantee that we will financially prosper if we stay committed on the straight and narrow. So we're going to open with the opening verse, which reads, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel." Solomon is the author of this. He was the son of David, the king, through whom he inherited the throne of the united monarchy of Israel. David was a warrior king. Solomon was famous for his wisdom. The way that David expanded or protected his nation was by defeating its military rivals all around them, thus establishing secure borders. And Solomon built on that inheritance with the wisdom he was provided with in a dream by Elohim at Gibeon. We read of this in the first chapter of 2nd Chronicles and the third chapter of 1st Kings. And so much of the wisdom which built and expanded his kingdom's influence is reflected in these. He's identified as the author of some 3,000 proverbs. There's only 678, and the truth is not every single one was composed by Solomon, and the book of Proverbs, though it is generally attributed to his authorship, was not compiled by him. So these 678 are all that we have of the 3,000, which are mentioned in the 4th chapter of the first book of Kings. "For knowing wisdom and discipline, for understanding the words of understanding." So this is sort of a mission statement, this and the next two verses 2 through 4. So the reason that he's writing this and the reason this genre exists in the reading is to know wisdom. That word appears 41 times in the book of Proverbs, and Proverbs is categorized as a species of wisdom literature because they are a wellspring and fountain of wisdom. Wisdom is the greater tier on the hierarchy of knowledge than understanding. So if understanding is the ability to dissect things, wisdom is the ability to put them all together. So it is constructive, it is practical. Wisdom is not lofty, abstract, or transcendent. It is in fact highly practical and needed in our daily lives in as much as our devotional lives. Discipline, the response and the embrace of discipline really divide the wheat from the chaff. Now, the natural man despises discipline, and he will reject it and go out of his way, whereas the prudent man will embrace discipline for its educative and remedial value. And to understand the words of understanding, so that requires understanding, because he's speaking of words of understanding, without the foundation of understanding, you're not going to be able to comprehend or apply or interpret any of these words of understanding. For receiving the discipline of wisdom, righteousness, justice, and straightness. So these are more side additional benefits to this book. So discipline of wisdom, wisdom and discipline are presented separately in the preceding verse, or somewhat separately, but here they are combined. The discipline of wisdom, one cannot become wise or grow or advance in wisdom without discipline. It demands daily, repeated, and consistent application. So the path of wisdom and the pursuit thereof is very much a disciplined course. One does not stumble into wisdom. One has to dig it out and seek it and actively pursue it and build on the foundation of yesterday's knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to expand it to today and move inexorably forward. Righteousness, judgment, straightness, these are moral qualities that are self-evident beyond argument. But what I want to do here is just review what we read in the second verse. We read of 7 different things in this mission statement. So the first is wisdom, discipline, understanding, righteousness, right ruling, and straightness. And I think we can combine discipline of wisdom. That rounds us up to the number 7. 7 in Hebrew numerology is the number of divine perfection. And what's interesting here is in Psalms 18:2, David, the father of Solomon, he lists the 7 attributes or characteristics of Yahweh, his rock and redeemer, and they all pertain to his strength. So David is a warrior, Solomon is a diplomat and an expositor of wisdom. So David kind of draws on the attribute of omnipotence, which is the quality of unlimited or infinite strength, whereas Solomon is more drawn to the attribute of omniscience. This is the quality of unlimited knowledge, unlimited or infinite knowledge, for giving insight to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. So the young is key. The young is what it's all about, because we mold the men we make when they are boys. It all begins by lovingly instructing them and disciplining them, and to give insight to the simple. Now the word simple appears 15 times throughout this book. We just want to qualify our terms. It is someone who accepts whatever they're told as truth at face value without critically examining or in any way try to dig more than what is immediately known. They're undiscerning and they lack insight. So from the blank slate of simplicity, I think every natural man left to his own devices as a child would remain simple if it were not for loving instruction and discipline. But insight can be attained and can be acquired through this path, and it all starts when you were young. So Solomon was groomed at the knee to know what he needed to know as king from his father David. The wise one hears and increases learning, and the understanding one gets wise counsel. So by the implicitly opposite inference, we can deduce that the simple one, the one who is not wise, the one who is not intelligent, will hear the same word but not benefit from it. They will not increase in knowledge or grow in perfection. But the understanding one gets wise counsel. Why? Because they actively seek it out. It's not given to them. That's something you have to seek out, especially when you're a king or a prince. You rely on advisors to collectively give you the broadest window to make the most informed decision possible. For understanding a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. So understanding Proverbs, he earlier mentions the understanding of statements of understanding, but here the proverb is the literary device. A proverb itself, we probably should have defined this before we started commenting verse on verse, but it is a condensed saying, a pithy saying of condensed wisdom. So we notice here that the author of Proverbs cultivates what Ernest Hemingway called the iceberg effect. the image being that even though there's not a whole lot on the surface, what lurks below is substantially larger and weightier than that which is above the surface and visible to the eye. So he says a lot without saying very much. He keeps it concise and simple language, and it does understanding a proverb. Now, a lot of these are so seemingly self-evident, other of these take, but even the self-evident ones, you can induce or concoct an original application or an original interpretation. And the words of the wise and their riddles, this acquires a level of understanding beyond the ordinary. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. So for the first and definitely not the last time in this book or in the scripture, we read that the foundation of knowledge, where it all begins, is with the fear of Yahweh. So that is the foundation and starting point of all wisdom and knowledge, and one cannot increase without remaining fearful of Yahweh, or else they're just going to have information overload. Now, we live in the so-called age of information, but what is lacking in our age is we are clearly not living in an age of wisdom. We don't value it. The information which comes to us, a lot of it is, we don't even notice it because it just passes through us. Anyone who browses the internet, there's a lot of filth out there, and a lot of Satan is busy and he's active and present on the internet, but so too is God. We just have to seek him out and make him known for our own part there. But this fools despise wisdom and discipline. This earlier ties into what I commented on discipline, verse 2. So a fool will not see past the pain of discipline. The natural man despises discipline because it indicates or demands struggle or pain, and that is something they seek to avoid. But it is the mark of the fool. They despise wisdom. They have no use for it. So wisdom's the other thing that a fool despises. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise, is the saying of fools. But we do not have the luxury, we who build the kingdom do not have the luxury to be foolish, because just like the temple that Solomon had to build required and demanded wisdom, so we don't have the luxury to be foolish, because apart from wisdom, our purpose and our destiny cannot be completed, realized, or fulfilled. My son, heed the discipline of your father, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother. So the parental dynamic is alluded to here. We read of a father and a mother. Education, wisdom, instruction, and learning and discipline begin in the home. Any set of parent who relies exclusively on schools to mold their children are going to be in for a rude awakening when they do not turn out as they should, especially with some of the wacky things they're teaching young people these days at school systems all across the United States of America. Satan is in the school system, but it all begins in the home, and the father is usually the one who administers discipline. And this also reminds us of verse 3:11, my son, do not despise the discipline of Yahweh, and do not loathe his reproof. And then it goes on, for whom Yahweh loves he reproves, as a father the son whom he delights in. So discipline, fatherly discipline, is in fact an act of love, even though it stings, even though it hurts, even though it's not pleasant. It is for the betterment and growth of the one who receives it. For they are a wreath of esteem on your neck, and necklaces on your neck. So he's comparing this to a physical adornment of discipline. There's something to look at and behold and marvel at. And this also reminds us of chapter 3, verse 3, let not kindness and truth forsake you, bind them around your neck. So a lot of the language from chapter to chapter and verse to verse repeats and reiterates throughout. My son, if sinners entice you, do not give in. Sinners are all around us, and that's what they do. They try to entice because, they look like they're having a good time. They're looking like they're getting away with it. They look like they're, no consequence is going to come. So they erect or purport temptation, and peer pressure is something that every person has to deal with, whether in the schoolyard, the office, or anywhere else. We are constantly pressured to conform to the ways of the world. But what do we read in Romans 12:2? Do not be conformed to the patterns of the world, but transform yourself through the renewing of your mind. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. So this is not an ordinary thing of a sinner. Most sinners and people who indulge in and partake in sin are not murderous, but this hypothetical Proverbs examines the broad spectrum of human characteristics and personalities. So what we have here is a murderous one who's trying to lure Solomon's son into killing people with him. Let's ambush the innocent without cause. Now, there's no rhyme or reason to hurt anyone without cause, but when sinners are so estranged from God, that's just the way their mind's oriented, that's just the way they think, and they have no one to blame but themselves. There is no rational reason for doing what they're doing, but they have a reason in their own mind. It will be fun. They do it for kicks. They do it for thrills. They do not do it for any constructive gain or beneficial purpose to themselves or other, because as we eventually read, the sinner falls trapped to his own snares. Let us swallow them alive like the grave, and entirely like those going down to the pit. So that's really gripping language. Swallow them alive like the grave. The grave would have been death, the pit, hell. So that's, these murderers, they mean business when they say let's kill innocent blood. They're not joking around. They elaborate on that thought of the preceding verse and the one that comes after it. Let us find all precious goods. Let us fill our house with spoil. This is another thing that sinners do. They're thieves, they're looters, they take what doesn't belong to them, and they try and fill their whole house, if they could, with other people's stuff. And that is wrong in so many ways. We feel it's ultimately unnecessary to try and tell you why that is wrong, because if you don't know that is wrong, you really don't have much business here. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. So even among sinners, there is a teamwork or a camaraderie of sorts, the fellowship of iniquity. And this reminds me of Socratic Platonic philosophy, where those who do evil do it on the misguided assumption that they are doing good. So the reason they form these confederacies with unsavory characters is there exists a bond of trust between them, even though they are betraying the trust of someone somewhere. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from the path. And we can liken this to the New Testament, where broad is the way of path and destruction, straight and narrow is the way to salvation. So the broad and way path is the way of sin, it's the way of self, it's the way of Satan, it's the way of all that is not worthy of salvation. So when we see these people, we can look at them, but we don't have to walk them, follow them, or mimic their life model or purposes or just appetites or destructive hobbies. For their feet run to evil, and they hurry to shed blood. So there is nothing positive which motivates the movements of these sinners. Everywhere they go, their feet are oriented in advancing towards the pursuit of evil or the shedding of blood. This is, not a light sin. So these are, not your average or ordinary sinners. These are murderers and thieves. Thieves is something a little more relatable, a little more acceptable. Everyone's stolen at least something in their life, but not everyone's ever killed someone or murdered them. For in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. So these very traps, snares, and deceptions that the sinners lay out, they're eventually going to trap themselves and that they spread their net, but any bird in the sky can see that they are winding themselves in, they are trapping themselves in their own destructive plots and delights. But they lie in wait for their own blood, they ambush their own lives. He who lives by the sword dies by it, so you reap what you sow, and if you live by the way of violence, you are going to meet your end by the very means which you lived by and swore by and tried to get away with it all. So the point of the passage is crime and sin does not pay. Stay away from them. Don't befriend them. Don't walk in their ways. Don't even look at what they're doing if you have an idea that what they are doing could somehow be fun or innocent or worth it, or you can get away with it, because even if you get away with it on earth, you cannot escape the notice or the judgment of the Almighty, all-seeing one in the heavens, who judges us at the final day. Final verse in the passage we'll be covering today. Such are the ways of everyone greedy for gain. It takes the life of its own owners. So the path of pursuit, the path in the pursuit of ill-gotten gain and illicit profit is that it takes away the life of the owners, and the life oriented towards the accumulation of possessions. The irony and the self-defeating paradox of it all is that he who amasses possessions is eventually possessed by the very things that they thought they possessed. Maybe at one time they did own them, but for whatever reason they just became ensnared by it, and sort of the more items they acquired, the more they became controlled, dominated, and influenced, and their possessions eventually possess them. So that is a path we are to avoid, and we have the formula and the strategy laid out here. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.